I remember Josephine and I talking about it, looking at pictures, but we have learned that LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Committee, needs the board's approval. So we'll be looking at
advisory recommendation included with the, okay. So we're live streamed, and Doris just gave a good intro. The first item on the agenda is new permit application at 435 Bay Ridge Parkway to install a perimeter fence around the front property located within the historic district. Tom Maxon, the homeowner, is here, who made the application. I just want to share with the members of the board that Mr. Maxon had contacted the board office a few weeks ago. And I reached out to LPC because I really wasn't sure. It was the first time we received such a request, and wasn't sure of the board's role and how we needed to handle it. And I met with LPC, and they explained to me that small applications, minor applications for work, mostly are handled administratively at the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And it seemed to me that this type of application, because there are a number of fences along Bay Ridge Parkway, we're all familiar, we walk there all the time, wouldn't meet that, but a fence does. And so there was a little bit of confusion because I saw there was a permit on the house, but it did not include this specific fence. So it does require, as part of the process, a letter from Community Board 10 in our advisory role to submit to LPC. So I guess, Doris, now Tom is here. Maybe we could turn it over to you, and I'll share my screen and just
Josephine,
yes,
if I may for a minute.
Sure.
Just because there are other fences of similar type does not necessarily represent a Landmarks appropriate fence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So Tom, if you want to speak about your application and request.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's pretty simple. We just want to put a fence in similar to other styles in the area because we have a 1-year-old daughter. So just want to create like another layer of safety so she can kind of play around in the front, or, if we leave her out there, she doesn't go into the road. That's basically it. We contacted LPC. We tried to do this in September, but it's just kind of been taking a while because they weren't sure about the process. So yeah, I'm here, and that's it.
So I will show, this is a picture of fencing that's on the block currently.
Correct.
This is your property
Yes.
currently. This is kind of, I guess, where the area will be that's fenced similar to others on the block. And let me see here if I could share with board members. Let's see. This is the design. This is kind of this is the design, right? That was included in your application. And let me see if I could.
Oh, is it tank snacks?
Yeah, I went through this.
Did you go through
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
I also
No reason for him to drive, spend 4 hours on the road.
I also reached out to several homeowners on the
Can we
block.
unmute? Somebody should be on mute.
There's a lot of
Who's-
distracting noise in the background. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, sorry. I just also want to let the committee know, since we have such a great list of homeowners on the block that were part of the application process, I reached out to more than I guess it was about 18 homeowners. Everyone was supportive that I spoke with. I know that there's one resident who joined the call. I'm going to allow her to speak, Miss Susan Brown. As you know, she was one of the applicants of the Bay Ridge Doctors Row landmarking. Susan?
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. I'm hoping that you approve this for Tom. As a homeowner of 53 years on this block, I can tell you that many people, obviously you've said many people have them, but for Tom, especially, he has a 1-year-old child and he is looking to protect her. And that's his main reason for putting this fence in. And in that article where we, in the Brooklyn paper, when we had our marker dedication, Sarah Carroll, the chair for the, they quoted her, and she's the chair in 2019, the press release they had for us when we became Landmark, said that Bay Ridge Parkway is like a boulevard. And because of that reasoning, honestly, I think he should be allowed to have this fence. Are the fences on the block all landmark quality? We were never landmark before, and I think we have to go with what we have on the block and use that as a criteria. Open for more suggestions.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, Doris, I'll turn it back over to you.
So there are already fences. Most of them seem to be of a similar design, and he is planning, Tom is planning a similar design, and it seems appropriate. And the ones who will make the final determination of appropriateness will be LPC. So knowing that the block has no issue with it, and I guess we should have, and do we, any discussion?
Yeah, it's Steve. I can't get my hand up again. Okay. I have, can I see the picture again? Is that possible?
Yes, sure. Hold on one second. This-
If
Yeah,
I'm a little bit, there was one where we could see on the inside or on the interior of it, not, that's the one I'm looking about. Tom, I'm a little bit confused here. I fully understand, and I have no problem with this whatsoever, but I'm missing something here. You want room, I assume, for your child to run around, but it looks to me like she'd fall down the steps, or he. I'm a little bit confused there. How does that work? Not the top steps, the ones that go down to the basement.
Yeah, see that red line? There's going to be a gate there to close that portion off, because that is a physical therapist office. So we're going to close that portion off too. So it makes a separate entrance dedicated to the basement space.
Okay, now on the opposite side of that, then, okay, so that your daughter would be playing in the in that area there. Okay, and all right, and I see where the black fence comes back already. Now there seems to be two fences there. One, the one on.
Yeah.
That would be further to the left. See, there's a space there. It looks like where used to be a tree or a planting on the left, right? Do you see what I'm talking about? Yeah, that space in there. What are you going to use that for?
We're just closing that space off, basically. It's just going to be dead space.
Dead space, and you wouldn't have access to it. So if you had to sweep or anything like that, what do you do?
That's making sweeping difficult.
Yeah, I can climb in there though. I'm pretty agile.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So that's only going to be just. Okay. That's like I said, I have no objection to the fence. It just that was just something that would confuse me a little bit. So in other words, it's just making a space to walk right down into the rental.
Correct. That's the idea, to try to funnel people down into that area because it is a commercial space and not have them like loiter around in that space.
Okay. It's a commercial space or a professional space?
It's a physical therapist office.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Yes, Doris?
Okay, yes.
I think that we need to clarify what our role is here, because I think it's safe to say that we all acknowledge that a fence is well in the realm of what everyone else is doing on the block and has done, and we have no objection to it from a functional standpoint. But I don't think it's in our purview to critique the fence itself. And if we were to critique the fence itself, I think the fence that's being presented is not up to a landmarks level of for the time period or for the feeling that the block has sought to enhance and maintain. The first picture you showed was, I think, closer to the fence that landmarks may look favorably upon. Can you put up the first picture in your series, Josephine?
Yes.
So what I'm saying is, I think it's possible for us to say that we are on board with the fence, but that we defer to landmarks as to the configuration or style of the fence. Because I think when you're in a landmark district, it's not enough to say that you're just going to match the other neighbors.
Okay.
That's the fence, I think, that's a little more in keeping with a landmark's point of view. But I don't know that that's our domain here.
Right.
Excellent point.
Excellent point. I agree, Ann. Stephanie?
I agree as well. It's not our taste is not mine. It's landmarks. Let landmark figure that out.
Okay. Stephanie, you had your hand raised?
Yes, I actually, based on what Anne was saying, I was going to ask earlier, do we have guidelines as to how we are supposed to advise? What is our purview with regard to this, in regard to what landmarks?
As I understand it, yeah, I mean, as I understand it, I did have a meeting with LPC, and our purview is essentially to reach out to the neighbors, solicit feedback, and provide that feedback to LPC. That's my understanding of our role. I think Anne clarified it further for us today, that it's truly LPC to determine, what the style of fencing requirement is for landmark quality. Okay, so I guess we need more. Yeah.
Were there when it was built, were there ever any fences? I mean, did they start with fences? Did they add them as they went along? I mean, all around. Again, I have no objection to the fence. I'm just asking the question.
It's a curiosity, yes.
So let me put Susan on, who did all of the research. Susan, you should be able to unmute now. Your hand is
Okay.
up.
There were no fences on the block when the houses were first put in. The house that you seem to like the fence at is 440, and Doris would know that's Rosemary O'Keefe's house. They put that fence in. And I think my house is number 3. And that was approved by landmarks right before we were landmarked on June 25th, so 2019. So mine is a very simpler fence. But yeah, I mean, Rowan Bill's 440 is a very attractive fence. But to answer the question, there were no fences on the block when the houses were first built.
But a fair portion of them have fences now, am I correct?
Oh, definitely, Doris, definitely. I mean, my neighbor, you know what, it's interesting. In 1940, the pictures of the houses that they were done for tax purposes Many of the houses had fences at that point. I mean, that doesn't say, you know, it wasn't when the houses were built, but it does go back that far. And I know 422 has a fence. I have a fence on 426. 428 has a fence. 440 Row and Bill O'Keefe's house.
More too.
42. I mean, I could go through the
Good
list.
number.
There are many. Many.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's interesting history, Tom. Any more discussion?
No, looks like we're ready for a motion. Doris?
Anyone want to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay, well,
I'll second it.
okay, I'd like to be, I would like to be a little more specific that the committee,
I move that we approve the construction of a fence, allowing not allowing and deferring to the Landmarks Commission to make the determination from point of view of style.
Perfect.
yeah,
I
perfect.
second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, abstentions, recusals? Okay, motion carries.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good to,
Tom.
good to see you all.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Yes. Hi, Susan.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, next item on the agenda. Department of City Planning representative who is here, David Weissglass, and also Carenza Wood are here today to discuss the upcoming zoning for economic opportunity text amendment. It's an informational meeting, and representatives from our local bids and merchant groups have also been invited to attend. And I see Amanda Zanteno, the Executive Director of the Fifth Avenue Business Improvement District, is here, and we are also expecting the Third Avenue merchants to attend. So, Doris, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, we're interesting to hear this. I'm just curious. I was on a Zoom call, I don't know, at least a month ago, about various initiatives that are planned, and it was under the category of the City of Yes, how to make things easier to get things done. Is this part of that related to it?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll present a little bit, and it'll have background on kind of City of Yes and kind of where DCP fits within that process, or within that, I guess, umbrella.
Thank you.
So shall we begin?
All right.
So now, David, you can share. I've given you the ability to share a screen. I know you have a presentation.
Great. Hold on just one sec. Let me get everything up and ready. All right. Right. So let me see if I can share it and have it full screen. All right, I cannot see the full screen here. Let me see if I can minimize y'all here.
Yeah, we see the full screen now, David.
All right, great. Thanks everyone for having me. I was able to meet some of you I know previously, and I did come to or hearing on the Shore Hill Road apartment a couple weeks ago. So I did get to finally shake some hands in person. It's nice seeing you all on the screen, but there's no substitute for being in person. So happy to be here. Happy to talk about some City of Yes items. Actually, hold on one sec. I'm going to minimize real quick and see if I can get something else up here. Can everyone still see the screen as it was?
No, it's a bit smaller now.
It's smaller. Let me see if there's a way to set this up.
David, would you want me to share my screen? Would that be helpful?
It would be actually, yeah. You have the one I just sent
You
earlier
go ahead and
today.
download the presentation. Yeah, one sec.
If only I had my double monitor, but being at home. Appreciate it. All right.
So can everyone see the full screen if I do this?
Yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
Great.
I can see.
All right.
All right.
So just tell me when to flip slides, David.
Yeah, we'll do. I appreciate that. All right. Slowly but surely we're getting organized. And this is yet another reason why it's nice to have in-person meetings. Okay, great. So as Doris brought up, this is about basically falling under the purview of our City of Yes. And we basically have 3 text amendments that we're going to talk to you about today. I know the request was mainly to talk about zoning for economic opportunity, which is definitely an exciting one. We're going to go into more detail about it, but we are going to discuss all 3 proposals as they kind of interact with each other, right? They're all affecting the same zoning resolution at the end of the day. And it's really difficult to just focus on one without kind of looking at all of them together. So we are going to touch on all of them. Again, I'm David Weisglass. I've met many of you already. It's a pleasure to be back here. And Carenza Wood, also a team leader in our office, or a team leader in our office, is happy to be here as well. And we're excited for it. So I want to reiterate a few things before we actually move forward. So first thing is that this is very, very early in the process. We want to give our community boards and other stakeholder groups heads up that we're beginning to work on these, and we can and we will come back to the boards as often as we can, as often as and more if requested, to give updates, to solicit feedback, especially that latter part. Some of you who were at either of our 2 public info sessions in October, you may have heard some of this already, but hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit more detail here as well. And as we go through this, you know, we are kind of communicating these things, but we have folks at DCP who are more educated on the specifics as to what we're researching and kind of how we're looking to achieve some of these goals. And so if there are other items that you're interested in or that you'd like us to delve more into in the future, let us know, and we'd be happy with some of those folks who can speak to even more detail than Carenza and myself. All right, so let's switch to the next slide. Okay, so what does City of Yes mean? So as Doris kind of introduced, this is a plan to use the city's zoning tools to basically accomplish that we have under this administration and things that we think are very important to accomplish. And those really fall into the categories of supporting small businesses, creating affordable housing, and achieving our climate goals, right? So DCP's started working and kind of going through the zoning resolution since this whole City of Yes initiative was announced to identify what in our zoning resolution might be impeding our progress towards these goals, right? And that's kind of what the idea is here. Something that I want to reiterate is that we're really focused on public engagement and connecting with our communities, our community boards, our elected officials, other stakeholders very early. And the details of our specific proposals are yet to be determined, and that's fine, right? What we're doing now is we're doing research. We're looking at what other cities have done. We're looking at different options that may be there to help us accomplish our goal. This situation where we're coming to you and saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. What do you think about it? This is a different situation in which we're saying these are the goals that we want to achieve. And then we want to collaborate with our community boards and with our stakeholders and with our communities to make sure that those ideas kind of shape the actual specific proposals. All right. Next slide, please. So First one, and these are basically in chronological order. Not all of these amendments will be kind of, dropped at one time. Obviously, we're still early in the process, but when they are, finally ready to kind of move through the ULURP process, they will be kind of going in a sequence. First one that we're going to be looking at is zoning for zero carbon. So this seeks to kind of reduce our carbon footprint. I'll go into more detail about that later. Of course, zoning for economic opportunity, which is a big one. They're all pretty big, which will provide local businesses with the ability to repurpose vacant spaces by removing outdated limitations that are keeping them from getting filled. And zoning for housing opportunity, which will encourage the creation of more housing of different types, and is specifically affordable housing as well. While these proposals are staggered in terms of the timeline, like I said, and the intention is not for them to totally work independent of each other. Zoning for carbon neutral could also work to help create affordable housing in a way that also reduces our climate goals, for instance. Same with ZE housing opportunity. They all are really kind of making changes that can help us accomplish those goals. Next slide, please. All right, carbon neutrality. That's the first one we're going to talk about. Let's go to one. Okay. So why carbon? Why does this matter so much? We're facing a climate crisis. This shouldn't be news to anybody. And it's largely fueled by carbon dioxide emissions. And this comes largely from the burning of fossil fuels. In 2016, the US, as well as many other nations, joined the Paris Agreement. This is a vision to curtail greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2013, before that, the New York City actually put forward to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. Those are lofty goals, right? And so it requires action to actually accomplish those. And action by every agency. And what we can do within DCP is make sure that we update the zoning resolution to remove impediments that can help our infrastructure and our buildings actually be greener, right? More resilient. Next slide, please. So what is a carbon neutral city? That's what we're trying to accomplish. It's a city that reduces carbon emissions in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and it reduces our overall energy needs. It focuses on cleaning the grid, which means switching from fossil fuel powered electricity to more renewable energies like solar and wind, and electrification of all the remaining energy needs, right? This includes vehicles and buildings. So you could see this in the chart that really are actual physical structures, the ones that are key drivers in our carbon emissions. But there's ways to severely curtail those just by making small updates to the zoning resolution. That's what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So what would it do? It would basically fix impediments in 4 areas. First one is renewable energy, which we just talked about. Building retrofits, that's a big one for buildings large and small. Supporting electric vehicles and micromobility, and supporting our efforts to reduce solid waste and our stormwater output, which affects tons of community districts, including CD10, of course. That's, I know, a big one. So let's move on to some examples of kind of what we're trying to do. So this is a good first one, give you an idea of kind of some of the issues we're looking at. This is a situation in which a building owner wants to add a solar canopy, solar power. Sounds like a great idea. Problem is, our zoning resolution has not just instituted height limits, but specific other regulations that lay on top of each other. And when they lay on top of each other, what this building owner would be able to do is put solar grids only in that green box. Everything that's highlighted in red, he or she would not be able to actually build a solar canopy. That would not be enough, more than likely, to power that building. Why is that in place? Because of all the regulations we had that may have been very well-meaning at one point in time. But this is a situation in which we can't really kind of put that off anymore. We need to take another peek at our zoning resolution, see what is actually helping us accomplish these goals and which regulations are a bit outdated, right? And if this is a situation where some outdated regulations can be removed so that solar panels can be added on roofs without, causing a huge change in the environment or in the character of the neighborhood, then that's something that we should really try to do. All right, let's go to the next example. So solid waste and stormwater. This is a huge one as well, specifically in Bay Ridge and Dyker Heights. So our waste stream is a pretty small part of the city's carbon footprint, but it does have straightforward solutions, and every kind of bit helps here, right? So typically stormwater goes into our system. It needs to be routed out, needs to be returned. It's a time intensive and an energy, cost situation, but there's a chance to actually keep stormwater local in rain gardens, in bioswales. There's a chance for us to update our rules, and again, to kind of clean up the code a little bit, to allow for innovative designs, right? Rain gardens designed by DOT or DOP, bioswales in the neighborhood. So we're working again with our sister agencies to see what might work within the zoning resolution in both the public and the private properties, to see what we can do here and see what we can use. So there's many more examples here, but I just kind of wanted to give a couple of really quick ones, and we can move on to economic opportunity. Thank you. All right, so zoning for economic opportunity. This is about making it easier to locate in New York City as a small business person, or to grow your small business. And it's important to take aim at our storefront vacancy crisis by modernizing, by clarifying our city zoning. This is really a cleanup, and all three of our text amendments are really cleanups, making things a little bit easier for people to succeed, right? In this case, in growing their small businesses. And that can help by not only helping aid economic activity, but it also creates additional job centers, and it also makes sure that our streets are vibrant, right? And make sure that they're safe and vibrant, and there's a lot of people using them. And that's what kind of makes our retail corridors especially successful. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So again, we want to remove obstacles to economic activity. This is not about really placing significant more additional requirements above what's already there, but obstacles for people who want to succeed as a small business person who wants to grow their business. And we want to make sure that we can do it in ways that don't, upset existing neighborhoods and kind of the character of them, right? So there's a chance to simplify rules that prohibit small businesses from expanding. And there's a chance to allow light, maybe non-toxic production space in appropriate areas of the city. About this amendment, and something about all three of these amendments, is that they are citywide. Every neighborhood kind of has the opportunity to do its part, but what's appropriate in one neighborhood may not be appropriate in another. So in some of the next few slides, I'll go into some examples, I'll go into some detail. Some of them may not be appropriate in CD10. Some of them may be very appropriate in CD10 and may not be appropriate elsewhere. But what I want to do is give you kind of the whole detail about it, just so you have an idea of what we're looking at in some of our different neighborhoods. And then we'll figure out kind of the appropriateness in collaboration with the communities. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So you can go into a bit more detail on the goals. We want to create a resilient economy, allow existing space to be repurposed. We want to allow the creation of flexible new space that actually meets the needs of today's businesses and helps jobs and helps to grow jobs. The nature of retail is changing. Obviously, COVID accelerated that a lot. And so we need to be a little bit more flexible to really create a city in which people can grow small businesses and be successful as small business persons. And finally, we want to bring jobs closer to where people live. There are some neighborhoods that are very transit accessible, right? And that's across all 5 boroughs. In those neighborhoods, there's no reason why the only job center that people can find jobs in is in, Midtown Manhattan. Maybe there's areas that we can actually help people have small businesses that are successful closer to their home, right? A few slides, I'll walk through a couple of examples and we can see. So here's the first example. So let's say we have a bike shop owner. This person's in the Upper West Side. They've been looking to also do some bike rentals and repairs. Pretty typical range of services. It's just bicycles. They're not going to have any noxious fumes or anything, or, extreme noise any more than what they already have. But they actually can't do this in their C1 zoning district overlay, right? They would have to rezone, which, as we know, is a very complicated process, or stay in the same location where they have a lease without actually having the opportunity to grow that business. And that's a bit of a shame. And something else is that a lot of times they'll see C1 overlays directly across the street from a C2 overlay, which would allow this kind of thing. Maybe it doesn't exactly make sense, right? So why is this important? Our zoning code has a lot of these maybe outdated, unnecessary, and at the end of the day, is just confusing restrictions that can make it really expensive and time consuming for a small business owner to understand where they can locate, what they can do, etc. With ZEO, we can modernize and simplify some of these things to make sure that small businesses can succeed in New York City, and that they can provide people in different neighborhoods different opportunities and different businesses and services, right? Let's go to another example. So this is up in Harlem, for instance. There's an artist, and this artist wants to create a studio to teach arts to children. Again, a more creative use, which is really vibrant, really helps a lot of communities. But this person's found that the perfect space for the lease has great high, foot traffic. But in this zoning district, art studios are not permitted on the ground floor within 50 feet of the street wall. It needs to be set back within the building. So that person will unfortunately have to keep looking, because they're not going to get any foot traffic, any kind of eyes in their space. Why is this important? In addition to what I mentioned in the last slide, New York City has more than 8,500 vacant storefronts, right? So we need to take aim at our storefront vacancy crisis, allowing for a wider variety of activities to occur in commercial zones, right? Opening up more spaces for new kinds of businesses to locate, reducing vacancies across the city. And it also creates new local jobs, right? One of the ways we hope to do so is by fixing some of the outdated prohibitions of some activities, like, an art school on the ground floor. All right, next slide, please. So here's a good example. We have somebody in Sunnyside, right? They're a building owner, and they've had a little bit of difficulty leasing some space in the last few years. Now there's a high-tech manufacturer who wants to come in and look in one of the floors of this kind of loft style building. Unfortunately, zoning actually requires a certain number of loading berths, for big trucks to be provided based on the current use of the building, right? So if they want to change a part of this building from an office use to a manufacturing use, they have to build a huge new loading dock, which may not make sense. It may not be economically feasible. And even if it's economically doable, it's just not an efficient use of space for maybe a high-tech manufacturer that's working on computer chips or something like that, right? So to basically do this requirement would be cost prohibitive, and it would leave a lot of the space in this building and many others continuing to be empty, right? And it's not cost effective. It's not an efficient use of the space that we have in the city. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in this example, we have the owner of a tapas bar in Astoria, let's say. They already have live music on the weekends, limited to the noise decibels and everything like that. But what they want to do now is set aside a really small space to allow some people to dance to the music. Unfortunately, the zoning resolution doesn't allow that either. It may allow the music, it may allow live music, it doesn't allow you to actually move to the music, right? So what we want to do is allow these services to be, permitted. And why is this important? This one also comes at it and really has an equity lens to it. A lot of this is based in the city's old cabaret laws, right? Those have a history rooted in discrimination and in bigotry. And the city council has voted to remove and to strike down our old cabaret laws, but our zoning resolution hasn't exactly kept up. So with ZEO, something that we can do is address the discrepancy by bringing our zoning laws into alignment with the city council's intention when they repealed the cabaret laws. There's already music permitted, so why not allow a little bit of dancing? As long as it's not, additional volume or anything, and they still need to kind of work within all the parameters we have. Next slide, please. This one could also work very locally, right? This is Rosa, who's a bakery in Carroll Gardens, could very well be in Bay Ridge on, 3rd or 5th Avenue. The business has been really successful, and they've been exploring the opportunity to expand into the adjacent storefront, which has recently become vacant. The problem is bakeries are only allowed to have 750 square feet or less of production space, right? So if they had more than that, they'd be categorized in our zoning as a food manufacturer, and they would only be able to locate in industrial areas, right? Obviously, if you think about 3rd or 5th Avenue, Bay Ridge, not an industrial area. So this person who had more than 750 square feet of actually producing the cakes and the cookies wouldn't be able to locate there. So there's no path for this person to grow their business at this location. We want to allow first-time small-scale producers like food manufacturers, maybe small-scale apparel makers, to locate and to grow in commercial corridors across the city. Next slide, please. All right, we'll go back to Sunnyside for this example. In this hypothetical, we have the owner of an industrial building. This is the one-story building on the left, right? Let's say they operate a film lighting rental business, right? The business has grown. They want to expand the building a little bit, and they want to expand upwards. They want to have maybe a little bit of office space, some more production space. This is an industrial area. You know, it's not nearby a lot of residential areas, so it's unlikely to, have significant nuisances to residents. They should be able to do that. Unfortunately, the only districts they have available are the ones that they're located in, which doesn't really allow them to effectively enlarge the building at all. Or another zoning district option would be one that has a very large FAR, 5 or 10 even, which wouldn't really be appropriate in this neighborhood. What we want to do is create new zoning tools, whether that's new district or other tools that allow existing industrial businesses to grow in place rather than have to relocate outside of the city, right? Today's zoning code would not permit this size building that the owner wants that's also appropriate in the neighborhood. You can't do just a simple 3 or 4 story building, right? It needs to stay exactly as it is, which limits that person's opportunity, or expand to a much larger building, which would be appropriate in this part of Sunnyside. Next example. And actually, this will be our last one for ZEO. There's somebody in a community who's concerned about the impact of dark stores, right? You've probably seen some of these. A lot of these are the 15-minute grocery delivery companies that you tend to see. They're paper, the windows and the doors, and they harm the pedestrian experience, right? It's not as pleasant. So zoning has ground floor design guidelines in many locations, and we're very proud of those and happy for what they can produce, but the rules change oftentimes from neighborhood to neighborhood, and they just don't happen to apply in this neighborhood. Why is that? You know, why is this important? Well, we're trying to strike a balance between consistent and clear rules, and also allowing new financial and also allowing small businesses to succeed without significant financial or regulatory burdens, right? And so ZEO is a chance for us to do that. All right, let's go to the next slide. So let's summarize this quickly. What will ZEO do? We want to allow the same types of uses or activities in very similar districts, right? I've spoken to this board about C1, C2 overlays, which are often found over residential districts and your local commercial streets. In many places in the city, you'll have C1 districts literally right across the street or right next to C2 districts. And to the naked eye, you can't really tell the difference. And yet they sometimes have very different rules about what's actually allowed or permitted. And there's not really a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it, right? So we should allow the same mix of businesses to make it easier for people to navigate and kind of understand. And the same goes for the larger commercial districts, which there's only so many in CD10, but already we have C4, C5, C6 districts that, again, to the naked eye, look almost exactly the same in character, but they have very different rules that are really difficult to navigate and don't really, have a sense to what's allowed here and not there. We want to remove our restrictions that exist in C4 and C5 districts that don't allow uses to be on the sidewalk or at the ground floor, even though that, they're just as economically viable or successful in activating the street as any other kind of use, right? Going back to that artist in Harlem. We want to be more permissive with some of the activities that are constrained by zoning, right? We want to allow small scale and clean production in that, we also that really are only right now allowed in manufacturing areas, right? 3D printing, small scale custom manufacturing. If we allow some of these outside of manufacturing districts, they could help provide additional job centers to other, locations. Allow maker retail businesses, right? Coffee roasters, ceramic stores, things like that in commercial areas where they aren't currently allowed. And of course, removing our cabaret laws to allow some social dancing within bars and venues. This is not about allowing a bar to become a nightclub. This is just kind of allowing a larger variety of services so long as it fits within the appropriate neighborhood, right? Another thing is buildings converting to different uses over time. We want to allow them to do so without creating additional loading docks or things like that. Want to develop a range of new zoning tools, zoning districts that could be mapped in the future to support job growth while also fitting into whatever neighborhood that they are in. right? Mid-density industrial districts are one that we tend to be looking at in more of our tighter industrial areas. And finally, be a little bit more permissive about what use the space, right? We want to ensure that spaces are still designed to be attractive and activate our sidewalk, right? So we're proposing clear and consistent guidelines, which helps the public in that they activate our storefronts and our retail corridors, but they're also helpful to building owners, to property owners, and to small businessmen and women in that they have some consistency and some clarity, right? Let's go on to the next slide. And we could talk about ZHO. All right, next slide, please. All right, we want to put a little bit more context on the crisis. We need to treat the housing crisis like the true crisis that it is, and that's what we're trying to do with ZHO. And we really can't put off action on housing any longer. Let's go on to the next slide to get a better idea of kind of what the crisis is. It's really largely the result of producing far more jobs than we do housing, right? New York has been a job center for, you know, God knows how many years at this point. We're very proud of the people that we attract here. We're very proud of our existing residents, and we want to make sure that as many people as possible are able to continue living here and are able to relocate to New York City without having to break the bank to do so, right? Something that we see is that it's such a low vacancy rate. That's not exactly healthy for a city, right? It's incredibly difficult to effectively protect tenants and make sure that people can live in New York City with vacancy rates so low. It's really hard to find an apartment, and when you do, you got to pay something really exorbitant and able to do so. This is a citywide issue, right? Like the other amendments, some tools may be appropriate in certain places and may not be appropriate in other places. And we'll figure that out in relation with our communities. But every neighborhood needs to play at least some part in relieving the crisis. And the other side of that is that no single neighborhood will bear the brunt of the change. We think these are really good changes. They'll be positive. And yet change is, change is just what it is. It's change. And every neighborhood will have a little bit of change or have to accommodate kind of a little bit of what we're looking at. Depending on where it's appropriate, but no single neighborhood or small number of neighborhoods will kind of bear the brunt of that. Everyone kind of will play a part, and that's why this is citywide. We want to remove a lot of the obstacles to equitable housing development that we've created in recent decades, sometimes created with great intentions, but maybe don't make a whole lot of sense anymore. And we believe that relatively small changes and adjustments across a wide variety, across a wide geography of the entire city can really serve our populations now and in the future. Let's go on to the next slide. So a couple things we were looking to do is allow housing types that serve everybody, right? There are housing types that we've made really difficult, if not just purely impossible to build over recent decades, some of the non-traditional types of housing, but they can form a really important niche in the housing market, right? They have the opportunity to serve certain populations very well. Make sure that those are legal. We want to ease conversions of obsolete or underutilized buildings, right? We've seen in COVID, a lot of commercial buildings or office buildings are not being fully utilized. Is there a way to convert those to housing, right? Is there a way to create more housing opportunity, give new life to some underutilized buildings? Next one, we want to focus on people and prioritize people, right? We understand that in certain neighborhoods, parking is really important, and we're under, no situation looking to just wholesale get rid of all the parking. We know that's something that's really necessary, but we are looking to prioritize kind of people over parking a little bit. This helps in also reducing our climate emissions, and it eliminates unnecessary requirements, and unnecessary being the operative word, right? Sometimes they're necessary. But when they're not necessary and not helpful, where can we actually focus on people over parking? And next one, we want to give forms of affordable housing, and that includes supportive housing, the same preference that we give to affordable senior housing, right? As many of you know, affordable senior housing or AIRS units in medium and high density districts are allowed additional FAR. And that's great, and we're very proud of that. But maybe there's an opportunity to work on affordable housing or supportive housing that isn't necessarily reserved only for seniors to allow greater densities when appropriate. Finally, we want to make it easier for owners of homes and small businesses to get what they need from the city, whether they have to go to DCP, DOB, BSA, whatever, all the alphabet soup, So you don't need to have an expensive expediter or a land use attorney in order to enable your buildings to change and adapt over time, even if that doesn't mean adding a new housing unit. Maybe your family is growing and you want to add additional bedrooms. Let's make it simple and easy for you to do so. Let's go to the next slide. So here's our first example. We have a single family home and they're actually in a 2-family district. So in theory, they could actually build 2 units here, right? And that's what the zoning overlays, and that's what this city has decided is appropriate here. So you do want to do that. You say, oh, well, I want to add a second unit to this. It's a 2-family district. Let me allow a second unit. Well, unfortunately, we have so many regulations that we layer on over the years that it's practically impossible here, even though in theory it's permitted, right? You'd have a requirement for a second off-street parking space, even though the person that you're planning to inhabit that second unit, maybe it's, you know, an in-law or a mother, a father, or parents or cousins, even though they don't have a car, you'd have to put that parking space in anyway. You'd have difficulties with the minimum unit sizes, right? You'd have a lot of difficulty adding exterior staircase because of front yard requirements. You'd have you'd have a lot of difficulty with side yard requirements. So yes, technically the zoning says that it's appropriate in this area to have 2 units, but with all the regulations piled on top of each other, you really can't actually do that, right? So let's make adjustments to make sure that that's actually permitted. Next slide, please. This is another example. We've got a building, you know, type that most people see in many different neighborhoods. On the left side here, a simple, you know, 1-story, sometimes it's 2 or 3 stories of residential, you know, above a retail ground floor. So if the owner of the 1-story building on the left wanted to replicate what is already existing on the right, it would be really hard, right? The combined parking requirements for both the commercial and the residential would be difficult, even though, you know, the new residents may or may not actually even own cars. It may be a very transit-rich area. There's not enough space on the site to provide the parking. And even though every building up and down the block looks like the one on the right, restrictions in terms of the FAR and height limits will also make it impossible to replicate that building form, which is all over the neighborhood in theory, right? So updating our housing portions of the zoning resolution what we're looking to do, and I've said appropriate a million times, but I want to reiterate it, is that we're not really trying to completely change the entire neighborhoods that are unrecognizable. In fact, I think this example is where it's something that's just the opposite, where a lot of times there are existing character within our neighborhoods that, whether we realize it or not when walking down the street, if you wanted to build that same thing today, you wouldn't be allowed to. So it is actually further meeting the character and allowing owners to further meet that character while also providing additional housing opportunity. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and that will basically sum things up. I'm sorry I went over a little bit at a time. We're really excited about these. There are a lot more examples I could bring up, but you know, I'm not sure if they would necessarily be applicable to CD10. But I hope this gives a little bit of an example, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, great. I think it might be easier to do the just stop sharing for a little bit so we could see everyone and see who has questions or comments. Doris?
Is anyone raising their hand at the, well,
Yeah,
Okay.
we have a few hands.
okay. Barbara?
Barbara, you're muted. Okay, oh, you muted and you unmuted. You're still muted. Okay, it looks good now.
I read recently that many owners of buildings that are affordable are keeping them empty. So the people move out and they don't rent them. So this could be adding to the problem that we're facing in terms of affordability and apartments. The owners aren't completely blameless, in other words.
Good point, Barbara. Thank you.
Yeah, we're well of that. This is not about, you know, painting anyone as a uniformly a good guy or a bad guy, right? That could certainly be the case, that some owners are keeping their buildings vacant. A lot of that has to do, to my understanding, with different tax regulations. And that's why DCP is only a small part of kind of this city of yes. We're working with a lot of our other agencies to make sure that those problems are fixable. And, you know, we have a lot of requirements that are being, you know, put in other areas in rent control laws and things like that to make sure that owners are acting in a way where tenants are protected, you know, for instance, within housing. So this really is just about cleaning up some portions of our code. This doesn't represent the entire story. The mayor, the administration, you know, our city leaders are focused on working with a number of different agencies to make sure that we can solve our problems. So this is just kind of one small puzzle piece within the entire kind of tapestry, but nonetheless, we think an important one.
Great.
Dan?
Leo, Dan, and then Steve.
Yeah, I can start. Well, my first question is, how can the board or the various boards and board members work with DCP, work with you guys in shaping some of these goals, essentially, that you guys are putting forward? Because I don't think that a lot of what you're talking about, I will personally have issues with, but it's like everything else, like the details, I think, is what really is going to matter in making these changes that are needed to work for people, but to also make sure that they're not abused, right? That there's certain limitations and certain guardrails, essentially, to prevent something that is well intended be taken to something that might not be desirable, essentially.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that. I mean, the way that you can do that is, first of all, just starting to do your now. Make sure that you come to these board meetings and help kind of just listen to kind of the ideas that we have and provide feedback in terms of what you tend to see in your neighborhood, right? So what Barbara just brought up of a number of owners maybe keeping buildings vacant, that's important, right? Among other things. There are some things that we may propose that could work in one district that you say, hey, we understand that could work in that district, but here, this could have this unintended consequence, right? You are the experts on the ground. That's the whole point of the community board system, is that you are the experts on the ground, you know, and we entrust you to let us know kind of what we may be missing. Sometimes we do our very best to understand our neighborhoods very, but there's no substitute for walking around the neighborhood, for living, for working in the neighborhood every single day. And so the way that you can support us is by letting us know not only the problems that you may see that maybe have unintended consequences, although that's very important, but also other opportunities, right? You may have heard some of the goals that we talked about today, and then in the specific said, oh, have you thought about this idea, which could help our affordability? Have you thought about this idea, which could help small businesses? So honestly, it would just be about noticing what's going on in your neighborhood just by virtue of living there or working there, and just letting us know and providing feedback about what you see and different opportunities that might be.
Steve?
Yeah, you know, I first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for a very good presentation. You're very good at it, and I think that you've hit many of these things that we really do have to address in this city. Having said that, you know, with what you've presented, and I recognize that Community Board 10 is primarily a residential community. When you talk about zoning for economic opportunity and you show us the things that you're talking about, what I see for Community Board 10 is zoning for residential infringement more than anything else. Perfect example, and this is just one, I'm not going to go into all the others, but it really worked across the board in almost everything you presented. You talk about these cabarets. Well, the cabarets, in fact, many of the things that you're showing today show stores on the ground floor, but show people who live above them. Okay. And if you take it a cabaret on 3rd Avenue or 5th Avenue in Community Board 10, or any one of the other commercial avenues that are actually not commercial avenues, they're actually residential with an overlay, so that they're actually residential communities. And I want you to bear that in mind, okay? And that they're there in order to tend to the needs of the local community. So if you decide that you're going to take a bar that we have, and very frequently we get complaints from residents who live above those bars or in the vicinities of those bars, and you decide that you're going to throw dancing, and you say, oh, what's the difference if they dance? The reason they've had this problem is because it's been shown that when you have dancing, it just adds another layer of entertainment that creates real problems for people in the community. And I haven't seen one thing that you showed. I mean, you showed about new homes and this kind of stuff and where we could put things and mix them all together, the businesses and residents and everything. But I haven't seen anything in there that talked about, preserving the atmosphere and the need for quiet enjoyment, okay, in local communities. And that makes me very, very concerned that it hasn't even been given a priority. Even the idea, like what did you call it? You called it zoning for economic opportunity, and then a few other things, but never in there did you really speak about the the quality of the residential experience. You're only talking about how we can bring in more businesses, how we're going to make the businesses work. And I think that's a real issue. Then you're going to get a lot of pushback on that if you don't address it. I mean, take a look at the slides you have. Almost all of them have residents that live above these places that you would like to see expanded. And I think that's a real issue.
Appreciate that. I said it during the slides, and I'm going to reiterate it again, that the key is where appropriate, right? We understand, and we have no intention of creating nightclubs or creating loud dance clubs in places where they're not appropriate and where they would have severely significant impacts, nuisances, whether it's noise or trash or anything else, on existing neighbors, right? There are some parts of the city where that might be appropriate and other parts where it may not be. So the intention with economic opportunity was giving the full range of things that we're just looking at all over the city. Some of them may not be appropriate in smaller or in lower scale purely residential areas. Many of them may be appropriate elsewhere. And so there's certainly no intention of having anything like that. To bring up, to go specifically to the cabaret example, that was only, perhaps that was my failure in kind of describing it correctly, but that's a situation in which live music is already permitted. There's many zoning districts in which that's not permitted purely for the reasons I bring up. It's not appropriate there, right? It would provide too much of a nuisance. But in areas where that is permitted and where that is appropriate, and where there aren't a lot of residents, maybe they're, commercial districts where there aren't residents trying to sleep, maybe we could allow businesses to be a bit more successful. Something that may be appropriate in Bay Ridge or in your local corridor might be something more like the bake shop, which still has to abide by all the local regulations of noise and everything else. So that's certainly not our intention, is to create, dance clubs out of nowhere, particularly where they're not appropriate. And so we look forward to working with CB10 and all of our other community boards and stakeholder groups to make sure that anything we're doing is not failing to put, the character and experience of the neighbors first.
Just a little pushback on that. Every time that you've spoken, you've talked about what the intentions are, but experience has shown, right, that even the best of intentions wind up with cabarets with music that are disturbing the neighbors. Okay, so I don't know how you're going to control that. And again, I think you're doing a great job. Okay, and I mean that seriously. But if you don't have controls on that by way of zoning that's going to say you can't do this, or that if you do it once, you lose your license. I mean, all of that kind of thing has to be considered, because this just looks like, we're calling this, again, like a, quality and using all those terms, yet I'm not hearing anything that's presenting quality. I'm just seeing overcrowding. I'm seeing things that are moving. I don't see any businesses being torn down to create business in what you're talking about, to create residences. I see a lot of residences that are going to be disturbed in order to accommodate businesses. I think it is too business centric, and I would oppose it if in fact it came back that way. And I would really strenuously oppose it, not only in Community Board 10, but elsewhere. I think you have to go back to the drawing board. Sorry.
I want to reinforce something that Steve has been saying, and he says it consistently at a lot of meetings. We are a residential neighborhood with commercial overlays. We have one small commercial district. but we have commercial overlays that are meant to serve our community. And the bake shop that
The
you showed-
residential community.
residential, sorry, yes, it's the bake shop that you show, I know well, but they're looking to expand from a bakery to a distribution center, which is not serving the community with a commercial overlay.
Okay,
And
we have-
then I just want to make a note, in the presentation that I saw, this part was the most controversial from residents all over the city, from from Midtown Manhattan to quiet parts of Queens. This was extremely controversial. And Carmelo, you had something to say. I cut you off.
It's okay. Thank you. All I wanted to say is it all sounds good. You know, the carbon portion, the housing portion, and the economic opportunity portion. And yes, our zoning is quite effed up. Just the way just how it's overlaid and just the way we built our districts. Who's going to make these decisions when these alternate uses and these situations come up? And that's ultimately where the rubber meets the road. I mean, the concept is great to open all these areas up to be allowed to rezone for X, Y, and Z. And now, but what I'm saying is, yeah, we've heard this before. New York City's always open for business. It's been open for business since 1649, God bless. And who will be making those decisions, and will we have input? Will it be a zoning board? Will it be I don't know, the buildings department? Who's going to spearhead this and ultimately make those decisions, and where will the community have input? Or communities, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. Going back to kind of the initial slides that we had, the devil is in the details. We completely understand that. And that's part of the reason we don't have the details yet, because we're looking to create those in collaboration with you, right? And so when it comes to the specifics about who's going to kind of really have the hands in molding the specifics and the details, I think this addresses a lot of the questions here, and who's going to have the power in really shaping a lot of these, that comes to our communities. So this is a break from what you may or may not have seen in the past, where we'll come up with a proposal and then kind of just check with the community to see if they like it or not. That's not what we're intending to do here. And it's for that very reason, right? It's for the very reason that we want to put power in our communities and in our stakeholders themselves. And so that is kind of intended to be our first opportunity to really get into the specifics there.
So I'm understanding this will be more collaborative.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, listen, obviously, we're just hearing of this for the first time, and you know, obviously, as details get released, we'll have comments. Thank you.
Certainly,
I appreciate your time. Thank you. You made a good presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. Yeah.
Anne and then Stephanie.
Yeah. David, thank you for letting us know that we'll be able to be involved in the specifics. And I want you to know that if that happens, it may be the first time ever. Most of the time, the specifics are just delivered to us fully baked. And so I thought that I would take this opportunity to comment on something that you did mention specifically, and that was the solar canopies. You showed us the diagram as it exists currently, where there's only a small percentage of the roof that's allowable. And I think it's really important to increase this opportunity for the city, for all of us. But I want to ask you to consider a setback from the street wall as you advance your thoughts on this topic. Otherwise, the solar canopies will be the visual atop everywhere. So if you
Understood.
could just take that into account. Thank you.
Yeah, going back to the initial conversation. I mean, that's exactly the feedback we're looking for, right? Is things like that we could bring into the conversation. So I really appreciate that, and thank you.
Stephanie.
Okay.
Yes, David, thank you very much for the presentation. You're talking about adding quite a bit of density to the city, whether it's residential or commercial. Will there be comprehensive studies done in each area of the study of the city to see if the infrastructure can support that expansion? I mean, we've recently faced a situation where a proposal does not would not be supported by the existing infrastructure. So this is the whole city. Will you intend to have comprehensive studies?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. This again, I know I'm a broken record at this point, but this also goes into our appropriateness conversation. When we're talking about appropriate, we're talking about the neighborhood character, like we've discussed, but we're also talking about the ability of the neighborhood to kind of handle some of the impacts that may result, right? And so an area that may not have the infrastructure, it may not be the most appropriate area for, more significant, larger scale changes. However, even changes can have an impact. We know that as well. And so that's part of the reason that these are kind of moving at different speeds and they're going to be sequenced, is because they're all going to have to undergo environmental review of some sort of the likely result. And this is not going to change anything in terms of what's required in the ULURP process of a larger environmental assessment statement or environmental impact statement. And the third thing I want to bring up is that, again, DCP is just one small part. Yes. We're working with all of our other agencies, including, working with DOT to make sure our streets can handle the additional infrastructure, whatever that those changes may end up being. Again, we're forming a collaboration with y'all. And working with other agencies to make sure that stormwater drainage and runoff, can be handled. But I think that again goes back to the way that these all work together, right? I talked about zero carbon, and that talked a lot about bioswales and stormwater runoff and our ability to actually retain those, pardon me, on site. And part of that can help mitigate any impacts that we would see from other situations. And so there's really three parts to that. One is making sure that any of the larger changes are likely to occur in areas where the infrastructure either can handle it or we are, planning to have it built very soon. B, having them work together such that, for instance, zoning zero carbon can help accommodate a couple of extra residents that may or may not, be permitted in a certain area. And just making sure that we work with all of our other agencies to make sure that we're not really providing any neighborhood or any area more than it can handle infrastructure wise.
Great.
And I'll note too, that because this is a citywide text amendment, and we're not doing any changes to the underlying zoning designations, right? But just tweaking what's in the zoning text today. All of these amendments will have slightly different, relevancies to each different community district. So one thing that we will do too, as we go through this process, is better understand how these three text amendments impact just CD10, right? As David said, we're at the beginning here. This is the scope of what we're looking at. But once we get more details and understand which zoning districts will be impacted by these various goals and proposals, then we'll have a clearer sense how it will affect this district.
Great. Doris, if I can.
Yes,
I just
please.
have a few items. So I just want to input, as district manager, I sit here and a big portion of my day is fielding complaints from and questions about zoning from residents and neighbors. And over the years, I've certainly learned a lot. And this board has advocated for some awesome changes that have led to citywide changes, including the Streetscape Text Amendment, which I have to say, we were one of the leading boards that led to the creation of the Streetscape Text Amendment. But what we've also seen as a result of that is that it really hasn't been enforceable, so that we have lost a lot of our front yards and spaces to being paved over without real teeth or consequences. We've had less street trees planted as a result of it. Oftentimes, what we see here, the parking challenges, have led to illegal curb cuts, illegal front yard accessory parking spaces. And I think as we look at putting more bioswales and street trees, we really need to look at and take a look back at the, efficacy of the streetscape text amendment that is already in place and how effective it's been, and some of the problems that we've seen here in Board 10. And I'm sure, David was there. We had a tour, gracious enough, with DCP Chair Garotnik to kind of show him a pavement tour on the ground of what we've seen in Southwest, communities of CBs 10 and 11. So I wanted to share that. As far as the economic opportunity, there is a great deal of C1 overlay within our commercial strips, just to share with board members. So I think this is something that we're going to have to pay close attention to. I think there's a lot of great ideas, but changing definitions of use groups is something we're going to need to really understand and kind of see how it will impact our districts. Steve mentioned cabarets. A lot of our C1 districts are very small storefronts, maybe 1,000 square feet. So adding dancing, and I understand the cabaret laws were changed, and that's fine, but still having the restrictions and zoning for C1s, I would say 9.9 out of 10 times an illegal a cabaret or patron dancing, it permits patron dancing, and you increase occupancy. And when you have bad operators, sometimes that has really devastating quality of life and crime impacts. This board we had, and I think I had mentioned this in an email to David, was one of the concerns because we had an illegal dancing, establishment within the C1 district that resulted in, tragically in the loss of life. So these are things that we're going to look at. And of course, there's so many positives that you had mentioned as well in your presentation. I thought it was great. But as you said, again, just as a board, I think we in CB10, different from other boards, we have a lot of C1 overlay, 3rd Avenue, from Senator to 82nd Street, 3rd from 86th to Marine, 5th from Senator to 85th Street, 4th from Marine to 101st Street. Bay Ridge Avenue, again, this is a very residential block from Narrows to 3rd Avenue. So any changes in the use group definitions within those overlays, I think are going to need to be looked at, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to be able to provide that feedback and commentary for sure. As far as, what we're hearing on the ground too, in terms of some of the retail converting to wholesale uses over the years, which were not allowed as of right, did change the commercial overlay corridor by adding more trucks and taking away parking for customers of nearby stores. So that's something that was resolved because of zoning in a positive way that really provided relief to other, commercial storefronts that expressed those concerns to this board, and we were able to help. So understanding, I think, too, why C1s are established, and, to begin with, knowing the history a little bit, I think would be helpful too, in understanding, because in many ways they've worked and how they can change. And I think, change is always good, to take a look back at zoning. Many on this committee have always said that, it's always important to look back and look forward. And so I think that is a positive. So those were just some of the thoughts I had from the district manager perspective that I wanted to share with both the committee members and DCP who's here today.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure who said it. Whether it was David or the young lady, but I would really recommend that you not say that we're not changing the underlying zoning. We're only changing the words. I mean, because that's the way that comes across. It almost sounds like like it's a trick. I mean, obviously, you get my point. Okay, I would avoid saying that in the future, because that's exactly what you're doing when you're changing the words. It's like having the Constitution and saying we're not changing it, we're only changing words.
No, that's absolutely fair, and I really appreciate that feedback too. I guess I meant it more in a technical sense, that we're not doing a zoning map amendment, but you're completely right. So thank you for that.
You got it.
And then I would like to make two comments. since we're using this as an opportunity to have a dialogue with you, you discuss the ability to make it easier to make conversions in 1 and 2 family houses and add more units. This is a community that has had many, many problems with very, very serious problems with illegal conversions that have been dangerous. And I think if you think back to recent severe storms, there have been deaths, not in our community, but in other communities because of inappropriate conversions. So I think reducing regulations in this area could be deadly.
I appreciate that. I would like to respond to that because I appreciate that quite a bit. I kept the ZHO and housing, opportunity things a little bit light here because I know that the main request was for economic opportunity, but we've definitely heard that from ZB10. It's been, on your district need statement years, and we know that you're affected by that deeply, and a lot of communities are. And actually, that really plays into part of we're looking to do something like this. Zoning rules don't permit something. That doesn't mean that people don't build them. It simply means that they're not permitted. So when something's not permitted and I build it, well, I'm not going to tell the city anything. I have no reason to live up to any health code standards, any building code standards, any electricity standards. Those are the situations in which you get basement apartments that aren't up to any standards, and those are the ones that are unsafe for residents. And so by easing restrictions, I think what we're trying to do is ease restrictions that are not health or safety related. Those are stringent and need to remain exactly as they are. Those are not in the zoning resolution. Everything keeping them up to date to make sure that they're safe and resilient as possible. We have no intention of touching those. What our intention is to make sure that when you build those things, you have the opportunity to do so that we can actually inspect them and make sure that they are up to our health and safety standards. In some of my previous experiences, when I've worked in other cities, we had dwelling unit legalization programs in which formerly illegal units, this is not necessarily something we'll bring in here, it's just kind of an anecdote, where formerly illegal units, you had the opportunity to come in and we said, okay, let us inspect your unit. We'll tell you exactly what you do to bring it up to code. And that situation, we saw that in areas where additional units were either prohibited, or in which case, like the situation I showed here, it was a 2-family district where a single family home just had so many requirements they couldn't do it. They said, you know what, I'm a handyman, right? I'll take a hammer and a couple of nails and build it myself. Those are the ones that were especially unsafe. The ones that were actually permitted and legal, those are the in which owners actually file. Those are the ones in which DOB actually could make sure that they're regulated up in safety standards. And the outcome of that was that we saw far safer units when they were legalized. And so that's in fact one of the reasons that we are looking into ZHO, and one of the things we're looking at is safety of not just apartment units, but units of all shapes and sizes, to make sure they're actually up to our health and code and our safety standards.
Okay. Now, could you give us a time frame on each of these initiatives? There are 3.
Yes, I could. I had it somewhere here. I'm wondering if I had it elsewhere on the slide. I want to make sure I have accurate info. They are going to go I'll tell you, they are going to go kind of order that I presented them, basically. So the first one that you're going to see is yes to carbon neutrality, right? And that's going to be, I think we're likely going to actually have some more detailed conversations on those moving closer to the ULURP process. I want to say, Karenza, feel free to update me if I'm incorrect, but I want to say in maybe early 2023 or mid 2023, and then economic opportunity, I think closer to 24, and then ZHO housing would be the last one, and that would be likely in 2024.
So you're basically saying that the carbon neutrality will be, and I think this is what they said in the meeting that I was on, would be early 2023, spring of 23.
I believe that's the case, but I will confirm and get back to you. I have a specific timeline somewhere. I may have accidentally left it out of this presentation. But
And then
there's more
this-
specific timeline I'm happy to present.
The second would be in 2024, and I would assume that would also be early 2024.
Economic opportunity. Carenza, do you know exactly? I'm thinking fall 2023, likely.
Yeah, I don't have the exact date on me. I know in terms of the kind of proposal, we'll have more information, spring 2023, but yeah, we're looking later year next year, but let us get back to you on kind of the latest on the timeline too.
Thank you. And okay, thank you very much.
I just had, just quickly, Doris, Amanda Zenteno from the Fifth Avenue bid.
Oh, yes.
Is on the call, and I just want to recognize her. And Amanda actually had, right before the pandemic, applied for a grant which compiled a community district needs assessment for Community District 10 that was not only limited to Fifth Avenue, but also Third Avenue. And while, it may be about 2 years or so old, it was a really comprehensive report that was done by our former board member, Michael Devine, who was on Amanda's team. So, it was a quality report. He was also a fellow here at CB10. So I would like to share that with committee members, because as we begin to prepare for our analysis, I think it's a good document. And we have a lot of new members, and it was really chock full of good data and information. Amanda, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. No, I do. I think it could be a very helpful document. It did talk an awful lot about things that the community is asking for in terms of their commercial corridors. And that is some of the unsupported commercial corridors in addition to Fifth Avenue, 86th and Third Avenue. So if you need copies, I also have copies in my office. Let me know if you want to give around instead of just the electronic version. My pleasure.
Great, thank you.
Great. So just committee members, for longstanding community committee members, remember we spent some serious work, I think was it 2021 and the beginning of 22, on various text amendments. We met twice a month sometimes. And I think we're back to the same schedule. I think we've got a lot on our plate, and we are most comfortable when we do our homework and share all our information. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of one another.
Okay.
Yes.
And thank you all.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
It's great.
Thank you.
Motion to
Yeah, I
adjourn.
want to thank our guests too.
Yes, thank you very much. Very thorough.
It's a great meeting. Thank you, DCP.
Thank you, DCP.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having
we
us.
want to
Thanks,
thank you as
DCP.
well. We're always happy to kind of share what we can work on and get some feedback from the experts on the ground. So this is
Yeah,
great.
we're tough, but not mean.
Most of the time.
The good kind of tough love, right?
And thorough.
I feel the love.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Have a
Thanks,
good night.
everyone.
Motion to
Bye.
adjourn.